From St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
I mean, how much do you really know about your friends? I don't think anybody really knows much about anybody. You get into a pattern with people and you get into a predictable manner of engagement if you know them, on a regular basis. And that's sort of how you live your life. My agenda is not to let me take you away from the reality for a little while. It's more like, let's go, head first into the reality and see if we can put it into a perspective that we can handle.
I'm Sarah Fensky. When Terry Gross needed someone to interview her, she chose Marc Maron. And when the Washington Post asked her why, NPR's greatest interviewer said that she knew he wouldn't let her dodge questions. "I didn't want it to be boring," she said. It wasn't boring. It's never boring with Marc Maron. His podcast, WTF with Marc Maron, has become a juggernaut simply because its host is so good at pushing without being pushy, at getting people to open up without playing Oprah. But Marc Maron wasn't always an interviewer's interviewer. He's also a longtime comedian, and he comes to St. Louis tomorrow, Friday, and Saturday for sets at the Helium Comedy Club. And he joins us today. Marc Maron, welcome.
Thank you. How's it going?
So, Marc, it's going a little nervously, I got to be honest. And thinking about your interview with Terry Gross, I have to ask, what's the key to interviewing somebody who's really, really good at interviewing?
Well, with her, it was really about, she at that time, she wasn't really that public a personality. So although she's a great interviewer, nobody really knew much about her. And there actually wasn't that much information available about her. So what little information I could find, I just saw where the gaps were. And I poked around in the gaps. And then it sort of unfolded. There was a whole backstory there and a sort of present story to her life that I don't think had ever been shared up until that point. And we did it live, which made it kind of exciting. So
this is not advice that's really going to help me today. I feel like there are no gaps in your life. We all feel like we know everything about you.
Yeah, well, there's a lot. I mean, but there is, about 23 hours a day that, I live without being, public or talking to people.
This is true.
There are some things in my life that I imagine I've kept to myself. But most of the big moments, I think that's probably true. I do. My style is to be fairly transparent and candid and, too much information guy.
And it's a big part of what people respond to with your podcast. You told Terry in that interview, which was just great, you said you interview in part to get your deep emotional needs met. You've been doing this now for 12 years. You dropped your first episode 12 years ago this month. Is that still true, that this is where you come for that emotional catharsis, is interviewing other people?
Well, sometimes it's catharsis, sometimes it's just connection. Catharsis as a word seems like it should be very exciting. And and sometimes it is. But I always find that I do, if I can connect in a way that it feels authentic and human and you have real moments with somebody, I think that I do still do that, and I do still look for that, and it does usually still happen. I don't know how a conversation is going to go ever, because I don't really, set out to have control over that. So when the interaction becomes real, it becomes very apparent, and it's exciting. So yeah, I still use my guests to supply me with some emotional nutrition.
And so a lot of your guests are people who have also been friends in real life or colleagues or people that you've worked with. Is that harder than interviewing a total stranger in some ways?
Not really. I mean, how much do you really know about your friends? I don't think anybody really knows much about anybody. They get, you get into a pattern with people and you get into a predictable manner of engagement if you know them, on a regular basis. And that's sort of how you live your life. New information comes in, there's problems that need to be dealt with. But usually a friendship is based on some sort of consistency and trust, but that doesn't mean you know somebody. So really, it doesn't matter who it is or how well I think I know them. It always sort of is surprising.
So that's kind of the chance to take it deeper, is to get them there in front of the microphone.
Sure, but you never know, what deep means or how it's going to go or what deep is to anybody. Sometimes it's just a matter of getting them out from under their public persona. It could be just a moment. It could be a lot of times when people talk out loud and you give them the space to do it, they'll find things that in themselves that they've never really talked about or thought about, and they'll be doing it out loud all of a sudden, and it makes for an engaging conversation.
So we heard from so many fans of your show, all sharing their favorite episodes. Bill wrote us on Facebook. He wrote, his conversation with Robin Williams was oddly prophetic because they talked about suicide. He's always been insightful about how comedy is born out of sadness and tragedy. He also has a great conversation in his archives with Norm Macdonald. I love his show because it's like eavesdropping in on a personal conversation with people you always wanted to know. And Ray writes on Twitter, Norm Macdonald, it was the best hour and 15 minutes I've ever heard on a podcast. Funny and touching, especially him discussing his fear of death. So many of us went back and listened to that yesterday. And it seemed like you and Norm were real friends who went way back. So first I want to say I'm sorry for your loss. Just listening to the two of you talk about comedy, it was just so funny, and it really felt like that moment of getting to eavesdrop on the kind of conversations you guys must have when we're not all listening in.
Yeah, I think that conversation and also the one with Robin are totally unique in terms of who those guys were. I had never really talked to either of them at length ever. And, I didn't really know Norm that well. But, I made the space available, and I was excited to talk to him. And the same with Robin. It was sort of a different situation. But I don't know why it happens, how it happens when I talk to these people. I don't know what it is about me that it makes them kind of emotional and connected. I'm very interested in people, and I listen well, and I'm sensitive to who we are as comedians. And I've spent my life doing comedy, whether anybody knows that or not. And my sort of love and understanding of people who do this job, this craft, is deep. And I kind of have a certain amount of space in my heart to understand, what brings us to this point, to be this profession, to be these kind of people. With Robin, that was, I think the only reason that happened was because I was at his house and I drove there to do that. And both of these conversations took place a decade ago or more. But I drove to Robin's house and it was just him and I. And Robin on his own was a very kind of shy, thoughtful, open guy. And there was no one there. There was no one else there. So he didn't really need to put on a show, which I think is his impulse. Mm-hmm. So that conversation's a very rare and beautiful thing. And it's the same, it turns out, with Norm, is that, Norm was obviously, like Jeselnik, Anthony, tweeted yesterday that, Norm having cancer for 9 years and not telling anybody is so Norm. Like the idea of how, I mean, he seemed to hold on to his heart and his personal life very tightly, and you didn't never really feel like you knew him. But for some reason, for that hour, 11 years in 2011, 10 years ago or whatever it was, with me, I just, there was an opening.
Yeah.
And I don't think another interview with him like that exists. And it's a beautiful thing to have. And I'm happy these things exist when these people leave us.
Yeah, I mean, he seemed so loose and so happy in this interview. And he also talked about being an introvert, as you say, just that this wasn't something that came easily for him. It seems like maybe just having that opening of knowing he was talking to a fellow comedian, that's what did it.
Yeah, sometimes people are just ready to talk, and it's exciting to talk when they feel like, I do think some of it has to do with my need to connect with people. I think I'm sort of very immediately, codependent or enmeshed or have a desire to sort of relax my boundaries, which is not that hard, and really kind of integrate into someone else's story and be part of it and be part of what they're talking about. So, like, in a way, even though I'm abrasive and cranky and interrupt a lot, I am pretty, selfless in these interviews emotionally. And I think I think you can just feel that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, another recent interview, or another interview that everybody's been replaying a lot recently, where I really felt that was with Michael K. Williams, the great actor who played Omar on The Wire, had some other wonderful roles. And listening back to that conversation, you guys are both so in the moment and you're connecting with him so deeply. He's not a comedian. This was an actor. Have you listened back to that interview?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it wasn't that long ago, you know, sadly.
Yeah.
That was one of those things where I really enter these conversations not knowing, you know, what's going to happen, you know, and I get filled with dread and anxiety, and it really isn't until you engage for that first exchange where where I relax. So, and I, you know, as time goes on, I don't. You know, I do even less preparation than I used to, and I try to get a sense of somebody. But him and I had the common language of sobriety to have a conversation about that. And in retrospect, in light of how he died, it becomes a very poignant and sad, but exciting conversation. I mean, he was very candid about having relapsed before, having struggled with sobriety, but also very much living in the day and understanding that that's all he really had. And I think to lose somebody like that, who was that alive and that aware of the sickness of addiction, it's powerful on a couple of different levels. And I think it's helpful as much as it is sad in retrospect. Yeah,
I mean, it's a tough interview to listen back to, but it's also, we all see so many clues there. He says, I believe in some form or fashion we're all addicts. And you're somebody where you no longer have that drug problem. Where do you find yourself feeding that Jones these days?
That's a little personal.
I got to get that thing that nobody else has asked you, right?
Oh yeah, no. I mean, look, man. I spread it out. You know, I'm relatively compulsive. I'm older now. You know, I don't. I drink a lot of coffee. I exercise every day, but not crazy. Mm-hmm. I spin in my head. I listen to a lot of music. I play guitar. I spend time with people. You know, at this moment today, it doesn't seem like anything that I'm, filling that Jones with is destroying my life. It's a little exhausting to have a brain like mine, but I seem to have I have a handle on it. I do get overly caffeinated and fine. I drink so much coffee that I need a nap. I get overwhelmed and exhausted because I amp my brain too much, but. I'm relatively safe. I try to stay away from the ice cream. There's a place there in St. Louis. They send me ice cream sometimes, and it drives me nuts because I love it, but I can't have 8 pints of ice cream in my house.
I'm glad you brought this up. I wanted to ask you about this. This all started when Clementine's Creamery sent you 12 pints of ice cream, and you put a really humorous response, I believe, on Instagram.
Yeah.
Did you end up eating all 12 pints?
No, I give them to my neighbors sometimes, or I've been spending time with this woman Kit, and I'll give it to her, but we don't need it either. But it just I ate enough of it to know that was good, and then a lot of times I'll just yell up. I got a neighbor, Kelly, and she lives upstairs, and if her window's open, I'll be like, Kelly, you want some ice cream? And she'll come down. I'll just unload some pints on her, but it's very good ice cream. But I cannot have that much in the house. Part of the compulsive problem or the addiction problem with me is that, look, if it's out of sight, out of mind, I'm good. But if it's in the freezer, it's going to talk to me.
I mean, that seems fair. So Clementine's Creamery, they have kept these pints coming. It wasn't just the 12 pints?
No, it happened, I think, a couple more times. They invited me, when I'm there, they wanted me to come scoop ice cream for charity or something. I'm like, that's like going to a drug den. I can't I can't. It's like going to a crack house. I can't do that.
So you are not going to be scooping ice cream at Clementine's this weekend, is what you're telling me.
No, I'll try to give to charity in another way, but so in a way that extends my life as well. I don't need to clog up my heart by sitting around an ice cream for 3-4 hours.
We're talking today to Marc Maron, and he is coming to St. Louis tomorrow. He has sets at Helium Comedy Club Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Marc, we've been talking a lot about your podcast because this podcast is a juggernaut. I mean, you have President Obama on. You get incredible guests. You do an amazing job with them. But you were a comedian first. Do you feel like people almost forget now that you're a comedian? They think you're the interviewer guy.
Well, I don't know if they ever knew. It was when I started the podcast, my comedy career was comics knew me, and I was always on Conan, and I had respect in my world, but I didn't. I wasn't a ticket seller. So as the podcast progressed and it became popular, people started to know that I did comedy, and then they would come out and see me do comedy in this idea. The language that some of the fans would use early on was like, we should go support Marc. I'm like, I don't need the support. I mean, if you want to come watch me do what I've done my whole life, you can do that. And by the time I started the podcast, I had been on Letterman 4 or 5 times. I've been on Conan O'Brien like 45 times.
Yeah.
I've done, comedy specials. But for whatever reason, who knows? I just never, caught on necessarily. But it all started to kind of evolve together. There was a period during the beginning of the podcast for the first 5 or 6 years where people would say, I really like that show, and I wouldn't know what they were talking about, whether it was a podcast or a stand-up show or, once I got Glow, I no longer really need to ask now because it doesn't matter how they know me. If they come see me, they know me one way or the other, and they probably know all parts of me. After I did my series Maron on IFC, and then I did Glow, and, I have the podcast. I've been in a couple movies. Look, they know me from somewhere, and it was enough to get them in the club, so I'm fine,
And does that make it easier to do stand-up that people are coming in thinking, oh boy, this is like a big celebrity. I'm coming in prepared to laugh?
Well, I don't know if they know me that's necessarily the thing they're saying to themselves. I don't know if they're saying this is a big celebrity, and I don't know if they're, saying like, oh, this guy's going to really, make us yuck it up. I think if you know me, the kind of comedy I do is going to be, thought-provoking, somewhat deep, a little dark. But, I've got a handle on it. And if you know who I am and what I talk about, you'll have a good time and you'll enjoy the show. I try to kind of thread a sort of theme through the hour and try to deal with what we're all living through today. I'm not the type of entertainer that my agenda is not to like, let me take you away from the reality for a little while. It's more like, let's go, head first into the reality and see if we can put it into a perspective that we can handle. So I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but it's definitely an engaging hour or so that I'm working on right now. But to answer your question, it is nicer to have people who know who I am, to have fans especially in St. Louis, which is, I'm not doing a lot of clubs. I generally do small theaters now. I'm at a point where I can do that. But to work on the material and to sort of, get it tight and get it, really kind of funny, I've been doing certain clubs in certain markets where I don't have a huge draw. I mean, Missouri in general, I don't think is a Marc Maron state.
I mean, that's possible, but I feel like St. Louis is a real Marc Maron city. Like, people are pumped.
There are people there, like there are people in St. Louis where, when I do the type of shows I do and, where people know where I'm coming from, intellectually and politically, you do get the sense that, most of the people there, it's sort of like, it's almost like a safe space. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, so you're requiring, or I should say Helium is requiring that people either have a negative COVID test or proof of vaccination. Is that maybe a way of screening out? So you make sure you get your Missourians and not necessarily people who are like, Marc Maron, I don't even know that guy.
Well, it was me, I request that. Sure, I think that most of my audience is probably grown up enough to be vaccinated and care about the broader public health issue that we're all up against. But look, man, when I do clubs, that is the work. I came up as a club comic. I'm still a club comic. I believe that what I do can be and is entertaining to anybody, whether they know me or not. I've had people walk out of this hour that I'm doing. Like I've done it in several, red, sort of purple at the very least. I ran it in Phoenix for 2 shows, which is definitely a kind of active crucible of right-wing
that's a good way to put it.
And weirdness. Yeah. And but I've had people come up to me and go like, that was hilarious. I don't agree with some of the things you say, but you're definitely a funny guy, and that's nice. That's encouraging to me that Americans who can handle that and still can speak that way and still engage with that type of honesty as opposed to kind of a tribalized defensiveness was encouraging. So I encourage anybody to come. I mean, but you do need to be vaxxed or recently tested, because I don't want any of my people to get COVID unnecessarily. I'm going to test myself here at home in an hour or two.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that seems like a good precaution there. One last question I have for you today. I saw the promos for one of your shows in LA, and it said you were doing comedy, but you were also playing music. Is that something people can expect at the St. Louis show?
No, I'm not. I've done that once, and I put together a little band, and it's just been a lifelong dream. And at this point in history of the world and of me, I'm kind of trying to check a few things off the bucket list, and playing with other people on stage and singing and doing that is something I've been enabled to do by this place here in LA. But I'm not touring with the band.
Touring with the band. Okay.
There will be no music this weekend.
But there will be comedy. Marc Maron will be at Helium Comedy Club. Again, that's tomorrow, Friday, and Saturday. Ticket info at WTFpod.com/tour. Marc Maron, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure. Thanks for talking.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri, St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.